In the years right after the Civil War, America didn't just rebuild, it completely reinvented itself. We're talking about an explosion of technology and money that forged an industrial titan. But this incredible growth was built on a really radical and you could even say ruthless new way of thinking about work and business. So let's dive into how the hunt for ultimate efficiency led not to perfect competition, but to getting rid of it altogether.
So, the decades after the war created this stark new reality. On one side, you had this immense, unprecedented industrial power, these huge factories fueled by new machines and tons of cash. And on the other side, you had the individual American worker, who was, all of a sudden, feeling pretty small in a world that was changing way faster than anyone could keep up with.
And this quote just nails the feeling of the time. As these companies grew to a scale nobody had ever seen before, the skilled craftsman, the person who built things with their own two hands and their own expertise, they found their individual value was just shrinking. A real deep sense of powerlessness started to creep in.
Okay, so what exactly caused this massive economic earthquake? What were the big forces at play that kicked this whole transformation into high gear? Let's break it down.
It was really a perfect storm of innovation. You had all these tech breakthroughs happening right alongside huge new waves of investment. People were inventing new ways to organize massive companies, pretty much on the fly. And for the very first time, things like national credit, super cheap transportation, and even national advertising were connecting the whole country. It created this single giant market that was just ripe for the taking.
And all those forces we just talked about, they all came together to completely revolutionize how things were actually made. This wasn't just about building bigger factories. It was a fundamental shift in the whole philosophy of work itself.
At the very heart of this was a pretty radical idea back then called scientific management, which was pioneered by an efficiency guru named Frederick Taylor. His whole goal was to basically strip all the art and the guesswork out of manufacturing and make production as logical and as predictable as a math equation.
And you can see the shift so clearly right here. Before Taylor, one skilled worker might build an entire product from start to finish. Taylor's big idea was to shatter that whole process into dozens of tiny, simple, repeatable steps where each one was performed by a different, less skilled worker.
And this is where you really see the trade-off of this new system. Sure, production got incredibly fast and efficient, but the cost was human. Individual skills didn't matter as much. Workers basically became cogs in a machine, as easily replaced as a bolt or a gear.
To really see the impact, let's look at a real-world example. In 1880, the McCormick Company was making farm equipment using the old model, with skilled craftsmen. That year, they made 21,000 mechanical reapers. Not bad, right? But production was slow, and relying on those skilled workers made it expensive.
But then they embraced Taylor's new techniques, and the result? It was absolutely staggering. Less than 10 years later, they were churning out over 100,000 machines a year. The scale of production was just on another planet compared to what came before.
And this wasn't just happening at one company, This revolution in mass production pushed the entire U.S. economy into a totally new league. By 1913, America was producing a full one-third of the world's industrial goods. We're talking more than Britain, France, and Germany combined.
But there was a catch. All of these massive factories, the fancy new machines, the national supply chains, they all required a mind-boggling amount of money, way more than any single person or even a small group of partners could ever come up with. So the solution was a legal innovation just as much as a financial one, the modern corporation. This structure let companies gather huge amounts of cash from thousands of different investors. And this was the real game changer. It protected those investors from being personally wiped out if the business failed. This just opened the floodgates for investment on a scale no one had ever seen before.
But all this incredible efficiency created a brand new and almost fatal problem. With so many companies now able to produce so much, so cheaply, they all just ran headfirst into a wall.
See, it turns out that massive efficiency is a double-edged sword. The huge costs of running these giant factories meant that companies had to keep selling stuff no matter what. And this led to these brutal, cutthroat price wars where companies would just slash prices to keep the production lines moving, even if it meant they were losing money on every single sale.
The industry leaders tried everything they could think of to stop the bleeding. They formed informal trusts to try and control supply. They made these secret price-fixing deals. They even tried to carve up the national market between them. But these gentlemen's agreements,
They were fragile. They almost always fell apart.
So facing this disastrous competition that they couldn't control through cooperation, the titans of industry landed on a much more permanent solution. If you can't beat your competitors, just buy them.
And this kicked off a period that historians now call the Great Merger Movement. It was this unbelievable wave of corporate consolidation where thousands of smaller independent companies were just swallowed up by their bigger, more powerful rivals. The sheer scale of this is hard to even wrap your head around. In just 9 years, 4,000 independent American companies just vanished. They were folded into other firms. Think about that. Nearly 1/5 of the entire American economy was consolidated in less than a decade.
And this was the result. In industry after industry, sugar, oil, you name it, when the dust finally settled, you'd find a single, massive, consolidated firm controlling over 70% of the entire market. For all intents and purposes, the competition was gone.
The crown jewel of this entire movement was U.S. Steel. This was orchestrated by the financier J.P. Morgan himself, and it was formed by merging 8 of the country's biggest steel companies. It became the world's very first billion-dollar corporation, and it controlled the single most important industry of the age.
And that really brings us to the ultimate conclusion of this whole process. The solution to the chaos of cutthroat competition wasn't to find a better, fairer way to compete. Nope. The solution was to get rid of competition completely. Monopoly wasn't some unfortunate side effect of all this. It was the entire point.
So you can see this incredible chain reaction, right? The obsessive drive for efficiency on the assembly line creates a need for massive amounts of money, which then fuels this insane level of production, which leads to destructive price wars. And finally, the only logical way out becomes creating monopolies. Now, this process undeniably built the most powerful economy on Earth, but it leaves us with a really critical question. What are the long-term consequences for an economy and for a society when competition isn't just defeated, but is systematically engineered to disappear?